We continue the Shir in Navi, in Jewish Hebrew history. We spoke, the last part of the Shir dealt with Eliyahu Hanavi, the fact that Hashem has 3 keys which he never transferred to any angel. The key to life, birth, that is, the key to Tchias HaMesim, bringing back the dead to life, reviving the dead. The third, the key to rain. This was never given to anyone until we came to the story where Eliyahu Hanavi, as a kanoi, one who fought to avenge the honor of Hashem, prayed to Hashem, give me the key to rain so that I can stop the rain from coming down, to fulfill the statement in the Torah which says that if you turn to idol worship, Hashem will stop the rain, will bring famine. This was given to Eliyahu Hanavi, and he swore there will be no rain from that day on until he himself will permit it. This brought about a famine. At this point I want to correct a regrettable error we made at the last minutes of last week's Shir, because of the hurry to close it. We erred in one word. We spoke about the case of 2 women who came before the king and complained about the fact that one of the women had killed her son. The famine was that serious. She killed her son, they ate the flesh of her son, and she wanted now to have the other woman do the same to her son. That's how serious the famine was. The king became furious, and he said we must do something radical against the prophet who was guilty. He claimed was guilty in this. That story we erroneously, by error, regrettably, because of the speed I say, riato, we attributed to the case of Achav and Eliyahu Hanavi. Of course that is not so. That story took place later on, the case of Yehiram, grandson of Achav, and Elisha Hanavi. We'll get to that part of the story later on. However, the point we spoke about, that the famine was a very serious one, that was true. That's the part we're up to now. At this point, the Gemara tells us it was that bad that Eliyahu Hanavi once walked out in the time of this famine, and he saw the extent of the chinuch, the training that the children had received by their parents. He saw a child, a boy, lying in the ashpot, the garbage. The child had been thrown out, discarded. This child was lying there, swollen from famine. He had not eaten at all, he was dying. In pity for this child, the Navi said to this child, I can save your life. If I teach you something that will save your life, will you promise to repeat it? The child said, of course. This was not an infant, it was a child, old enough to understand. And he said to the child, repeat, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Echad means only one. There is none other. Only Hashem is one. The child cried out, Chas v'shalom. Dare not mention the name of one that is different than what he'd been taught. He'd been taught to worship idols, and in his condition, his famished condition, he was close to fatal state, about to die. The child pulled out his symbol that he wore, symbol of idol worship. He kissed it, and with that, he died. This was the extent of Avodah Zorah at that time, the Gemara says. This was the reason we could see, we could understand, in Eliyahu Hanavi's point of view, why he was so much the avenging angel, why he fought so much for the kavod of Hashem. Now the Gemara says that the Torah tells us that Hashem called to Navi and said to him, the king is out to get you, go hide at the river near the stream, near the Yarden. There you will drink from the stream and be protected, and I will send ravens, black ravens, that's unkosher birds, to bring you food. That way you'll be able to sustain yourself. The person must eat in order to live. Stay there until it is safe, Hashem said to Navi. As far as food is concerned, you'll have these birds that will bring you food. You recall we had a long discussion on this, and we learned the Gemara Chud, now Shabbos Shia. The Gemara discusses this point. Where did this food come from? The Maskana, the Gemara was that the food came from the butchers, the Shachtim of Achav. Achav was an Eved Zara, an idol worshipper. His followers, the Gemara proves conclusively, were also idol worshippers. Therefore, their shchita, their slaughter, was not kosher, which means that the food there, their meat, was not kosher. And yet the Gemara says, Hashem told Navi he would send the ravens to carry the meat from the butchers of Achav to Navi. How could that be possible that he would be given this food, which was, to say the least, questionable as far as kashrus was concerned? There was a slight chance it might come from Ovadia Hanavi, the one kosher person living with Achav, but that was infinitesimal chance. The Gemara answers Al Pi Hadibur Shani that this was through a command of Hashem. Hashem said, eat this food they're going to bring you, and therefore it was permissible to eat the food brought by the ravens. Now, the ravens are an unkosher bird. Note, the question is, obviously, this is done by Hashem. It's easy, simple for Hashem to do many things. Many other alternatives. Either to send the food from heaven, as the Gemara says, that meat that comes from heaven must be kosher meat. Ein davar tama yedem in the shemayim. The Gemara tells us, we had the Gemara sheet, we recall too, that Shema Chalafta, where meat fell down from heaven, and the Gemara says that the Beis Medrash, the rabbi, said it must be kosher meat. So simple meat coming from heaven, like the angels gave to Adam Arisha, which is kosher meat, that could have been given to Navi. Secondly, even meat on earth. The ravens could have brought meat from kosher places. It was that far away. They could have brought to Yehoshaphat, the king of the two tribes, whose people were religious. They could have had kosher meat there. Third, if in sending meat, it could have been sent by doves, pigeons, kosher birds, rather than raven. Why ravens? Why the butchers of Achav? The answer is that we are taught here what the Gemara tells us about the mitzvah of emunah. Emunah tzadikim and emunah Hashem are synonymous. You must have emunah in both. For a person to believe in the tzadikim, the rabbis of the Gemara, rabbis of the Shulchan Aruch, the poskim, recent poskim, to believe in them, when you ask them about something, if it is permissible, if it is kosher, and they say it is not kosher, it is forbidden, it's very easy for a Jew to accept that statement, because he's not risking anything. The rabbi said it's forbidden, you just don't do it, that's all. You have no pangs of conscience. It is difficult when the rabbi says to a person, this is kosher, this is permissible, when deep inside that person's conscience he feels that this thing is forbidden. His logic, his own logic, dictates to him that this is unkosher. It's nega nidali. To me it seems like a nega, like something that is forbidden, something that is not permissible, but he is told by the rabbi, you may eat it, you may do this. And here we have the mitzvah of leisosu min hadava yiminu smol. You're not supposed to go against the words of the rabbis of the tzaddikim, right or left. Right means to be more strict, and they tell you to left means to be less strict. It is much more difficult to accept a permissible attitude, decision, than one that is forbidden. Here the Torah teaches us this, where Hashem said, I'm going to send you food, because Hashem says so. Because this is a statement by Hashem, the same origin, the same source, and we receive the laws of kashrus, of items being unkosher, the same one that says the shechita is unkosher, that same power now says it is kosher. If you believe one, you must believe the other two, because it comes from the same makkah, the same source. The reason that this is why then it was specifically chosen to teach this point, that decisions of our leaders, spiritual leaders, kaviyachol from Hashem, the Torah, which is the word of Hashem, the Torah Shebal Peh, the words of the rabbis, both must be accepted without hesitation, without any suffix, without any doubt whatsoever. The reason that the ravens were chosen, because the raven is known as a cruel bird. It's an unkosher bird. It's very cruel, even to its own offspring. The raven is cruel. Here Hashem showed this is a raven. This is one who will not feed his own. Yet these ravens are going to feed a stranger, you. Now, will you learn a lesson from them? Learn a lesson of Rachman, of pity, of kindness. You are going against the entire Jewish people. You are causing a famine. Every one of them is starving. They're all dying of hunger because of you. Because you haven't got the kindness, pity, consideration, compassion for them. Look at these ravens who are naturally cruel, yet they have consideration of bringing you food. Perhaps this will make you change your mind. This is one reason. Rabbi Arizal explains, yes, the Odev is one that is cruel. The lesson taught here is that one who is cruel contributes, donates. That is the true meaning of tzedakah. What is the mitzvah of tzedakah at its highest peak? The person is asked to contribute money for tzedakah, and he gives. He's told, give a few dollars, he does, he gives it. It doesn't bother him. Then that's tzedakah, but in a lower sense. If he's approached again, he gives again and again. Till he reaches a point where he becomes disgusted, or he feels that this is demanding too much of him. It really begins to hurt him. And then he gives. That's the real meaning of tzedakah. Because when his achzonius, his sadism, his cruelty begins to show, his refusal to give, and he overcomes that feeling, an inner feeling of cruelty, and he gives despite this feeling, that's the true kedusha in tzedakah itself. And it comes to the point where he's like an oidev, a cruel bird. And despite this, the chalkalecha, despite this, he feeds the poor. Then he has reached the peak of the midah of tzedakah in its fullness. That the Arizal says is the lesson with the ravens in this case. Now, this lasted for a while. Suddenly, the stream ran dry. There was no more water. Then Hashem spoke to Navi again, told him to go to the city of Tzidon, that's in the Galil, up north. There, I have commanded a widow to feed you. Go to the house of a certain widow, there you will be fed. The Zohar Kodesh says, I have commanded, meaning that this command was given from Sheshis and Nebeneshis. When Hashem created the world, He already issued that command. There will come a time, there will be a necessity to feed Eliyahu Navi. At that time, Hashem decreed that this widow should exist in order to feed him. He came to the city of Tzidon. The Gemara says, the Medrash, that he looked around and he saw a woman gathering wood. And in his subconscious mind, he recalled something. It struck a familiar chord. He had not been told who this widow was, what she looks like. How was he going to recognize her? How will he know which is the one that was destined to feed him? He couldn't inquire now, it was too late. So he felt that there was something familiar about this case. His was the exact case of Eliezer, Eved Abraham. Eliezer, the certain one is told, go to this place, the city of Besuel, and there find a wife for my son Yitzhak Avinu. He came there not knowing who was the one that was destined to be the mate of Yitzhak Avinu. Then he was inspired to Hashem. It was a tefillah, the Gemara says, it wasn't a fitting type of tefillah. His tefillah was, Hashem, whoever gives me water to drink, that would you have destined as the wife of my master. The Gemara says the person could have been a cripple, could have been a defect that couldn't even be seen, a bit of mamzeres. And it turned out, of course, for his benefit, for good. So the enemy felt now the same thing applied to him. He would have to rely upon help from Hashem to select the right one. It was his duty, at least, to test that person. He'd use the same test as Eliezer did when he came to the city of Rivka. So he saw this woman gathering wood, and he said to her, could you please get me a little water? And she responded immediately, looking at him, recognizing this was a holy person, Ish Kodesh, and she immediately brought the water. Then he said to her, could you get me some bread, something to eat, cookie? And she said, I'm very sorry, I have only one spoonful of flour and a drop of oil in a jar. That's all I have. There's not enough to make. I have a child, not enough to make for all of us, but what can I do? And he answered, he said to her, you make for me first, and then for yourself and your son. The result will be that this drop of flour and this drop of oil will be enough for us, and it will remain further. It will last until the famine will be over. Again, the Gemara says, why did he tell her, make for me first, and then for you and your son? This was the case, chas v'shalom, of selfishness. It was the case first, little to test her goodness and kindness as far as gifts are concerned, but it was also a legality. Remember that Navi was really Pinchas HaKohen, and as a Kohen he was supposed to be given v'kidashtoi, to be given first, be fed first. Legally she was supposed to feed him first as a Kohen, then herself and the child. She agreed immediately, and she obviously detected in him the kedusha that was his. He was an ishalikim, a heavenly person. This widow was the mother, this child she had. She was the mother of this child, whose name was Yena. Yena, the prophet later on, he grew up, prophet who went through the experience of being swallowed by the fish, the experience that teaches us the Musa, which we read on Yom Kippur to Mincha. At this time, he was only a child, and this widow accorded Navi every respect possible. A short time later, this child suddenly passed away. But when he did, the only thing that this woman had to live for, she came charging at Navi in a very shocking manner. She cried out to him, you have just murdered my son. I accuse you of murder. This is a very shocking statement. But she backed up her words. She said, I am not a bad woman. Comparatively, and more religious than most people living in my vicinity. And therefore, in heaven, I was regarded as a, let's say, semi-tzaddikus, as a righteous person who should be treated with chesed, with kindness from heaven. That's how I got along until you came. The moment you came, when you lived in my home, what happened? I was no longer compared to the people in my city, I was now compared to you. Compared to one like you, of course, I'm a Marshas, a Russia, compared to one as holy as you are. And if I am that bad in comparison, of course I was treated in such manner from heaven. Accordingly, that's why my son died. The fact that you came to my home, indirectly or directly, caused the death of my son. You are his murderer. The Navi told her, bring me a son. Give him to me. He took him, he carried him to his own bed, placed him on the bed. And there he turned to, first he laid down on him, breathed into him, then he got up, he walked to and fro, and he cried out to Hashem, help me to clear my name. I don't want to have the stigma of murder against me. I ask, I pray that I be given the power of Tchiyas HaMesim to bring this child back to life. And here the Gemara tells us that all this famous story of Eliyahu Navi bringing a child back to life was all a trick. Kaviyachol, a heavenly trick, the part of heaven, part of Hashem. Why? Because Hashem is Rachum, Chanun, kind, compassionate, chesed to all Jews. Even if Jews commit sins, Hashem is still kind. Ator Nisa Yad LaPeshim. Hashem gives an opportunity for the worst sinners to do tshuva and to come back to Him. Hashem does not want to see the Jews destroyed. At no time ever did Hashem desire the destruction, the eradication of the Jews as a people. Hashem wants the Jews to return to Him, and Hashem wants only a leader that will bring the Jews to tshuva, not a leader who will reprimand them, scold them, and seek their destruction. In this case, though, Hashem had already given to Eliyahu Navi the key to reign. Now, in all fairness, Hashem did not want to take this back by force. But this meant kaviyachol. Kaviyachol means as though we could say that Hashem had removed from Himself the power of reign and transferred it to Eliyahu Navi, which means that kaviyachol Hashem could not get reign except through Eliyahu Navi. Now, how to get that key away from him was a problem, because he swore he would not surrender it unless the Jews would stop this idol worship. The Jews were dying of hunger. Hashem did not want to witness their death, to see that the Jews would die. Hashem wanted their salvation. But the key had to be taken from Eliyahu Navi. So Hashem decided on this whole act, where He sent Eliyahu Navi to this woman, to this widow, and there He caused the death of this child, knowing that he would then come before Hashem and plead with Hashem for the power of Tchiyas HaMesim. It was at this point that Hashem spoke to Eliyahu Navi and said to him, you want the key of Tchiyas HaMesim? Very good. You want something? I'll give it to you. Tzadik wants, Hashem fulfills. The desire of the tzaddik is always the first act on the part of Hashem. But Hashem said to Navi, let me ask you a question first. Between the two of us, Hashem said, who is the rabbi and who is the Talmud? Who is the student? And Navi said, of course, you're the rabbi of your student. What question? So Hashem said, all right then. Let me ask you a second question then. Is it nice would it be nice for a student to be wealthier, more powerful than his rabbi? And he said, of course not. Certainly not. So Hashem said, if I give you the key to Tchias HaMesim, you'll be wealthier than I am. There are only 3 keys between us. The key to birth, the key to Tchias HaMesim, the key to rain. You already have the key to rain. I have the other 2. If I give you the key to Tchias HaMesim, you'll have 2 and I'll have only 1. Is that nice now? But I know you want the key to Tchias HaMesim. You're very anxious for it. So I'll tell you what. I'll make an exchange with you. Give me the key to rain back. I'll give you the key to Tchias HaMesim. This was very happily agreed to by the Navi to save his name. He said, fine, here, immediately. Hashem said, good. Here's the key to Tchias HaMesim, with which he now brought the child back to life. Very next second, Hashem said to the Navi, now you go to Achav and tell him, I will give rain tomorrow. I will give rain, not you. I now have the key to rain. Tell him that I will give rain. This command he had to fulfill now, of course. He was still glad to get through with this woman. Say that here's your son back. Never start with the other side. And she was very thankful. She said to Navi when he gave her back a live child, she said, now I know that you are Ish Kodesh, Ish Elikim, the heavenly person. And she said, Levad Hashem Leficha Emes, the word of Hashem in your mouth is truth. This the Zaydik Kodesh says, her words, which said, your words are Emes, truth. That's how we have that her son now had a newly adopted father. He was called Yena ben Amitai. Amitai is truth, Emes. He was called Eliyahu the truth. And Yena's child he brought back to life was not called on his name Yena ben Amitai. So, at that moment he left this place, and at that moment too, Achav, who was suffering because of the demands of the Jews, seeing the Jews suffer too in this famine, had in his palace a Vadya Hanavi. A Vadya Hanavi was a pure Navi, a tzadik, but a hidden tzadik. Achav's wife Izebel, the wicked Izebel, had killed all the tzadikim existing then, all of the Nevi'im, the holy Nevi'im, students of Navi, except 100 of them whom Vadya Hanavi had saved. He had rescued, at risk of his own life, he had rescued 100 of them and hid them in 2 caves, 50 in each cave. He secretly each day brought them food and water. So he sustained their lives, rescuing them. This was one of the biggest mitzvahs possible. That's why the Torah calls Vadya Navi Yirei Hashem Mi'oid. It's a very, very powerful midah of Yiras Hashem. Now, of course, he was not suspected by Achav and Izebel. He was suspected he would be killed immediately. Now, Achav, who considered his close servant, said to Vadya Navi, let us both go in search of water. We haven't got food, at least let's get some water to save the lives of the livestock, whatever is left. So they set out in search of water in 2 different directions. On the way, Vadya Navi met Eliyahu Navi. He was very shocked to see him because Achav had said, let's find Eliyahu Navi. He is the one that we have to blame. Let's get at him. Now, Vadya said to Eliyahu Navi, my master is seeking you. So Eliyahu Navi said to Vadya, go back and tell him that I will see him today. Vadya Navi said to Eliyahu Navi, I can't. Please spare me this task, because if I go back, tell him you're going to see him today, and suddenly a wind, an angel will carry you off, as usually happens to you, imagine what he'll do to me. He'll kill me for lying if I tell him you'll see him. So the Navi answered him, replied and said, you tell him, on my word, that I will see him today. He came back and told Achav. Achav came forward, he greeted Navi. When he saw him, Achav cried out, you are the killer, the destroyer of Jews. And Navi answered and said, it is not me, it is you. You and your idol worship is what destroys the Jews, not me and my famine. If you would not have had the Vesartim Va'avadatim, you would not have had the Avodah Zarah, you would not have had the result of the Otzar Shemayim and the famine. In any event, he said, now, the time has come to correct the past. I want you to summon all the false prophets, all the Nevi'ei Habal, the Nevi'ei Sheda. There were over 800 of them together, 450 Nevi'ei Habal, 400 the others. Bring all your false prophets together, bring them to the top of Har Carmel, Mount Carmel in Haifa. There, I want you to summon on that mountainside, bring all the Jews, assemble them all to witness the contest between your false prophets and myself. We're going to prove whom the Jews should believe in. The idols that they spread, the idea of idol worship, or lahavdil, faith in Hashem Echad, which I speak of. This was done immediately. Achav summoned all the Jews to Mount Carmel. They came to, they all assembled at this mountain where they could see on top, where Navi said to the false prophets, build yourselves a Mizbeach, and I'll build myself one too. They did this, and then he said, now, we take 2 calves for 2 sacrifices, 2 korbanos. They're both similar. They're identical. In fact, they were born from the same cow. I want you to pick anyone you want, so you cannot claim there were tricks involved. And then I'll take the other one. The posek says, he told them pick, and then it says they took the one that he gave them. The Gemara says, if they picked, why do you have to give it to them? You want to answer because a little problem ensued. When they selected their one, this calf came forward, walked over to Navi and said to him, why is this happening to me? He spoke, because even a calf has feelings. And of course the language of animals, birds, trees are known to tzaddikim. King Solomon knew the language of these all living beings. The Gemara said, Yochanan Zakkai knew it, the great tzaddikim knew it, Arizal, Hashem told many stories about them. This calf spoke to, cried before Navi and said to him, this other calf and myself, we are both born in the same cow, both the same. Why should this other calf be privileged, be honored, that he be sacrificed to Hashem, the covered of that magnitude, and I should have to go to be part of this idolatry? For what reason? This one should have Kiddush Hashem, and this one should be Chilul Hashem. Why do I deserve this? Navi replied, you're wrong, because the same Kiddush Hashem that will come for the one that I sacrifice, you'll have the same Kiddush Hashem by not being sacrificed to the idols. The fact that there'll be no miracle done with you is the same Kiddush Hashem as the miracle done with mine. The calf said, sorry, that answer did not satisfy me. I will not go unless you take full responsibility. You have to hand me over yourself. I will not go willingly. And with this, because he says that he handed over, he gave this calf that they chose to the Habal. This shows how what we call dumb animals are much smarter than we are. Their Mesiras Nefesh, their Ahava, serving Hashem, is far more tmimistic, far more sincere than ours many times. We can learn from the so-called dumb ones. What is meant by serving Hashem with sincerity. After they selected this calf, they placed the calf on their altar, and the contest was that they should prepare everything except the fire. And then each one should call upon theirs. These prophets should call upon their idol they believe in to send down a fire from heaven to consume their korban, their sacrifice. These Navi Baal started to dance around the sacrifice, calling upon, summoning, invoking the power of their Baal, and minutes went by, hour went by, there was no sign of fire or miracle. The Gemara says that one of the worst sins a person, or at least a Talmud Chacham, could commit is the sin of leitzonus. Leitzonus means to joke around, make fun, mockery. A person should be serious, especially when the Shekhinah is in Golus. The Gemara says that the person should try to avoid comedy, laughter, joking around. In fact, the Gemara says that Rabbi Nachman once made the statement that the Shekhinah is in Golus, there is no laughing in heaven, there's no laughter in heaven, Kaviyachol, since the time of the Churban. The Gemara says that the Shlakas of Rabbi Nachman's Talmud, the moment he heard that, never again smiled the rest of his life, because he wanted to participate in the sadness of the Shekhinah. The Gemara tells us that even David Melech, the first sentence of Tehillim, says Ashrei Ho'ish, blessed, great is that person who does not go on the path of an Eshoyim. What does that mean? He does not stay in the company of leitzim, of jokers. Leitzonus is very bad in the sense that it brings down upon a person the worst type of Yisudim. The Gemara says that regular sins bring Yisudim suffering. Leitzonus brings Yisudim l'chai adam, a very low, horrible type of Yisudim, type of suffering, punishment for it. So therefore, Leitzonus is forbidden, at least for those who are pure, b'nei Chachamim. But the Gemara says there's one exception. When it comes to Avodah Zarah, idol worship, or idols, there it is permissible to make mockery, fun, jokes of these idol worshippers, of these shkotzim. The Gemara learns it from this case. This case here was the holiest person alive, Eliyahu Navi, most serious person alive, Pinchas, Kohen Gadol, Eliyahu, the prophet, Eliyahu, the Malach. He stood by and watched these Nevi'ei Habal jumping, dancing, crying, singing, screaming, calling upon their Baal, their idol, to send down a fire to consume this korban. The Jew stood by and watched patiently, semi-patiently, because time was going. He waited until the afternoon. It started in the morning. In the afternoon, and he started to taunt them, to tease them, to mock them, to make leitzonus. And he said to them, you've got to scream louder, because the idol you're calling upon, I'm sure, has left on a trip. He's far. So scream louder, he can hear you. He's very distant from you. By taunting them, they had to respond. They screamed louder and louder. Again, he waited a while and said to them, wait, I'll tell you why he doesn't hear you. He just went to the bathroom. He locked the door. He can't hear from there. But he's got serious troubles. He'll be there quite a while. This, of course, is mockery, is leitzonus. The Gemara says it is permissible. So he continued to mock them, and as he mocked them, they kept on screaming louder. And then he said, I figured out he probably is having his nap now. He's a very heavy sleeper. So you've got to scream much louder than that. They kept on screaming, crying, and using their spears stabbing themselves, drawing blood. This was a type of service to their idol. All to no avail. The Arizal says that these Navi Habal actually were evil. They were bad, but they weren't that stupid. They knew that this idol, this piece of clay, could not perform any miracles. It was just their means, their trick to draw people for their own selfish good. How were they expecting this idol to set fire to the carbon? It would be disgraceful to them. Arizal says the secret was here that there was one of their own, one of the evil type. Recall the one that started this whole story going, the one who built up the city of Yericho, Chiel, who built the city of Yericho, despite the curse that Yeshua had placed upon the one that will rebuild that city. Yeshua said that the one who builds it will build a foundation at the expense of his firstborn child dying. He would complete the city, put in the doors with the death of his youngest. Chiel built the city despite this curse. He lost all his children, and then maintained his same evil. Now the Arizal says that they took Chiel, and when they built this altar, this Mizbeach, covered it, underneath they had Chiel hidden there with matches, with a torch, with a means of flame, with a lantern. And they figured they would use their wiles, their tricks, in calling upon the Baal. Meanwhile, hiddenly, Chiel would set fire to this carbon. They would claim it as a miracle. The Arizal shows how this comes out. The result was, of course, that Chiel died while underneath this carbon. Before he could set fire to it, this was his fitting end. So these false prophets failed. At that point, the Navi called upon the Jews to come and witness his act. He said, "Now watch as I mispal to Hashem." And here the Gemara says this took place, this was already the time for Mincha. And the time for Mincha is so important. It is such a time of Esteemed, that on Shabbos Kodesh, the holiest moment is a time of Mincha. It's called the Raiva the Raiva, the strongest moment, the Esteemed, strongest moment of acceptance on the part of Hashem. That's why we say the posek that Hashem Esteemed at the time of Mincha. And this carries on even for the Mincha time during the week. That's why the Gemara says a person should be very careful about davening Mincha, especially with kavanah and with a minyan, because the tefillas that a person send up to Hashem have a better chance of being answered at the time of Mincha. Proof is that the Navi's tefillah was answered at the time of Mincha. He was inspired by Hashem, and his tefillah was to Hashem to bring the Kiddush Hashem now by showing all the Jews after the threat to them that they cannot be on both sides of the fence, believe in idols and Muhammad believe in Hashem. They must make the selection, they must choose right now. And so after his tefillah he said, his basic tefillah was, Aneni Hashem Aneni. The Gemara says, answer me Hashem, answer me. Why twice? So he said, answer me first in my zechus, answer me in the zechus of my Talmud Elisha Hanavi. Secondly, answer me that the fire should come down from heaven. That's a miracle. I need a much bigger miracle than that, because the fire will not be sufficient. It is possible that if I get a fire from heaven, all the Jews will say, you used magic. And magic is no kedusha. Answer me, Hashem, that these thought should not even enter the Jewish minds. They should accept this as an act of Hashem. And this is what occurred. The fire came down. It consumed the Mizbeach, which had 12 stones around it. It had water in it. It was filled up with water. Everything was wiped out into this heavenly fire. The point of this tefillah was, above all, the second part, Aneni, Arizal says that the second part, answer me Hashem, help me that the Jew should not say there's an act of magic, is a tefillah for Jews at all times. That when you daven to Hashem, you put kavanah into it, and then Hashem sends the answer to your request. You need a cure for someone. The cure comes, chas v'shalom, do not fall into the trap of saying later on, it happened to come through a doctor, through medicine, or the position I looked for, the parnas I asked for came because somebody recommended me, or because my boss gave me a raise, or so on. Do not be misled that the tefillah was answered through something else, only through Hashem. That's the tefillah that each person should say, Anini Hashem, Anini, I should never myself fall into this trap of not believing Emunah Shlema. And with the zechus of Emunah Shlema, Emunah Hashem, Emunah in tzadikim, we will then accept truly, as the Jews said, Hashem hu Elokim, to believe fully in Hashem, in the tzadikim, the shluchei Hashem. We see what our rise the coming of Mashiach Tikuney, B'yom Beis Hamikdash, Amen, Amen.